Sarah Martinez thought she knew what loneliness meant until she found herself driving Nevada's Highway 50 at 2:30 a.m. on a moonless October night in 2020. The road stretched endlessly ahead, her headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt like driving through black velvet. She was 3 hours into what should have been a simple overnight drive from Salt Lake City to Sacramento, taking the scenic route to avoid interstate traffic. The GPS had warned her about the 287-mile stretch with no services, but she'd filled up her tank and packed snacks. What she hadn't prepared for was the complete and utter isolation that pressed against her car windows like a living thing. The first sign something was wrong came at mile marker 142, somewhere between Eureka and Austin. Sarah noticed headlights in her rearview mirror. Not unusual, except these lights had been following her for over an hour, maintaining the exact same distance. At first, she'd been relieved to see another traveler on this desolate stretch. But as the minutes ticked by, the constant presence began to unnerve her. The vehicle behind her never got closer, never fell back, never attempted to pass, despite long stretches of clear road. Sarah tried slowing down to 45 mph, then speeding up to 75. The lights matched her pace perfectly, maintaining that same eerie distance. She could make out the shape of a large truck in her mirrors, but something about its silhouette seemed off. The headlights were too high, too bright, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the vehicle itself. At the tiny town of Austin, population 192, Sarah pulled into the only gas station, a rundown place with flickering neon signs. The truck drove past without stopping, its diesel engine rumbling with an odd rhythmic sound that made her teeth ache. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, engine running, watching the road. Nothing passed in either direction. The silence was so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat. When Sarah pulled back onto Highway 50, she checked her mirrors obsessively. For 20 blessed minutes, the road behind her remained empty. Then, as she crested a hill near mile marker 165, the headlights reappeared. Same distance, same unwavering presence. But now she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were no other tire tracks in the thin layer of dust on the road shoulder, even though she'd seen the truck pass by. Sarah's hands began to shake on the steering wheel. She tried calling 911, but her phone showed no signal, not surprising in this remote area. She considered turning around, but that would mean driving directly toward whatever was following her. The nearest town ahead was Fallon, still 60 miles away. Behind her, Austin was now 40 miles back. She was trapped in a corridor of darkness with something that shouldn't exist. The psychological pressure intensified when Sarah realized the truck never appeared on straight stretches of road. She could see its lights approaching in her mirrors as she navigated curves and hills. But when the road straightened out, and she should have been able to see it directly, there was nothing. Just empty asphalt stretching into infinity. Yet the moment she hit another curve, the lights were there again, constant as a pulse. At mile marker 180, Sarah's radio began picking up strange transmissions. Through the static came fragments of CB radio chatter, truckers warning each other about the shadow rig on the 50 and that damn ghost hauler that follows folks. One voice, crackling with interference, said clearly, "Don't stop, don't acknowledge it. Just keep driving till you hit civilization." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving only white noise. Sarah later learned these weren't the first incidents. The Nevada Highway Patrol had received dozens of reports over the past 2 years about a phantom truck on Highway 50. Witnesses described the same experience. A large truck following them for hours, maintaining impossible distances, appearing and disappearing without explanation. Several drivers had pulled over in terror, only to watch the truck pass by silently, leaving no trace of its passage. The most disturbing report came from a couple in 2019 who claimed the truck had followed them for over 100 miles. When they finally reached Fallon and stopped at a 24-hour diner, they asked other patrons if they'd seen the truck. The waitress went pale and said, "You mean the Kenworth? The one that crashed at mile marker 175 3 years ago? Driver fell asleep and went off the embankment. They never found the body, said it burned up completely." When the couple drove back to check the next morning, there was indeed a burned-out crash site at mile marker 175, though it looked far older than 3 years. Sarah's ordeal reached its peak near mile marker 200. The truck's headlights suddenly surged brighter, flooding her car with harsh white light. Her rearview mirror became unbearable to look at directly. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of air brakes hissing, coming from directly behind her car. But when she looked in her side mirrors, there was nothing there except empty road and her own taillights reflecting off the asphalt. The phantom truck stayed with Sarah until she reached the outskirts of Fallon, where the first streetlights began to appear. As soon as the artificial light touched her car, the headlights behind her simply vanished. Not faded, not turned away, vanished, as if they had never existed. Sarah pulled into the first gas station she found, her entire body shaking. The attendant, a weathered man in his 60s, took one look at her face and asked, "You drove the 50 tonight, didn't you? Saw the ghost trucker?" Sarah could only nod. The attendant poured her a cup of coffee and said, "Happens more often than people report. Most folks are too scared or think they'll sound crazy. But we know. Those of us who work out here, we know that road keeps some things that ought to have moved on." He showed her a logbook where dozens of travelers had written similar accounts, dating back several years. The Nevada Department of Transportation investigated these reports, but found no evidence of any truck matching the descriptions. No vehicle registrations, no driver logs, no mechanical explanation for the phenomena. Security cameras at gas stations along the route showed the reporting vehicles traveling alone, with no truck visible in any footage. Yet the reports continued, all describing the same experience with unsettling consistency. Sarah completed her drive to Sacramento, but she never took Highway 50 again. 6 months later, she received a call from the Nevada Highway Patrol. Another driver had reported the phantom truck, and they were collecting testimonies. The investigating officer mentioned that they'd discovered the crash site at mile marker 175 was from 2017, not 3 years prior as the diner waitress had claimed. The driver's body was never recovered, and the wreckage had been cleared years ago. Yet witnesses continued to report seeing burned metal at that exact location. What makes this story particularly chilling is that Highway 50 incidents continue to this day. The road maintains its reputation as one of America's most psychologically challenging drives, not just because of its isolation, but because of the persistent reports of impossible encounters. The Nevada Highway Patrol now includes warnings about driver fatigue and hallucinations in their safety advisories for the route, though officers privately acknowledge that too many reports share identical details to be explained by tired minds alone. Sarah's experience represents just one documented case among many. The phantom truck of Highway 50 remains an unsolved mystery, a reminder that some roads hold on to their ghosts, and some journeys never truly end. Whether the result of electromagnetic phenomena, shared psychological stress, or something more inexplicable, the ghost trucker continues to follow lone travelers through the Nevada desert, maintaining his eternal route on America's loneliest road. The most unsettling aspect remains the consistency of witness accounts and the complete absence of any physical evidence. In an age of GPS tracking, dash cameras, and constant surveillance, something continues to evade detection while terrifying travelers on one of America's most remote highways. The Phantom Trucker serves as a stark reminder that even in our connected, monitored world, there are still places where the impossible becomes routine, and the road ahead might not be as empty as it appears. Mike Chen had driven the stretch of Interstate 80 between Cleveland and New York City dozens of times for his job as a medical equipment sales rep. He knew every rest stop, every exit, every mile marker between Ohio and Pennsylvania. That's what made the night of March 15, 2021, so completely terrifying. He encountered an exit that, according to every map, GPS system, and highway database, simply does not exist. It was 11:47 p.m. when Mike first noticed something odd. He was driving eastbound through a particularly desolate section of I-80 in western Pennsylvania, somewhere between the Clarion and Brookville exits. The area was known for its dense forests and lack of development. Just mile after mile of dark woodland, broken only by the occasional truck stop or gas station. Mike was running late for a morning meeting in Scranton and had been pushing hard to make up time. The exit appeared suddenly in his headlights, a standard green highway sign reading, Jamestown, exit 78A, 1 mile. Mike's first reaction was confusion. He'd driven this route countless times and had never seen this exit before. More troubling, his GPS showed nothing but forest for the next 20 miles. He slowed down and checked his mile markers. He was at mile 77, which meant he should be seeing signs for exit 78 toward Brookville, not some mysterious Jamestown exit. Mike pulled over at the next rest area and checked 3 different mapping apps on his phone. None showed any exit between Clarion and Brookville. No town called Jamestown existed anywhere near this stretch of highway. Yet, as he sat there in the fluorescent-lit parking lot, he could clearly see the green exit sign in the distance, illuminated by highway lights that cast long shadows across the empty roadway. Against his better judgment, Mike decided to investigate. He drove slowly back toward the exit, hazard lights blinking. The sign was definitely there, weathered and official-looking, with the standard DOT formatting. Below the main sign, a smaller placard read, Historic Jamestown, Est. 7. Population 247. The exit ramp curved off into darkness, disappearing behind a wall of pine trees that seemed to absorb his headlights completely. Mike sat at the top of the ramp for 5 minutes, engine idling, staring into the impenetrable blackness. No streetlights, no house lights, nothing to indicate any kind of settlement. The silence was so complete, he could hear his own breathing over the hum of his engine. Something about the darkness felt wrong, not just the absence of light, but something actively hostile, like the forest was watching him. He took the exit. The road immediately plunged downhill through dense woodland. Mike's headlights revealed a well-maintained asphalt surface, but the forest pressed in on both sides like a living wall. No guardrails, no reflectors, no signs of any kind. Just black trees that seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel effect that made him feel like he was driving into the earth itself. After what felt like miles, but was probably only a few minutes, Mike crested a small hill and saw lights ahead. Not street lights or house lights, but something else. A warm, yellowish glow that seemed to come from multiple sources scattered throughout a small valley. As he drove closer, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Buildings, but wrong somehow. They looked like they belonged to a different era, with architectural styles that predated anything he'd seen in rural Pennsylvania. The town, if it could be called that, consisted of perhaps 24 structures arranged along a single main street. Victorian-era houses with ornate gingerbread trim sat next to what appeared to be a colonial-era church with a tall, pointed steeple. Gas lamps, actual gas lamps, lined the street, casting that strange yellow light he'd seen from the hill. No electric lights anywhere, no power lines, no modern vehicles parked along the street. Mike drove slowly through the town, windows down, listening. The silence was absolute except for the low rumble of his engine. No sounds of life, no dogs barking, no television sets, no air conditioners humming. The buildings appeared to be in perfect condition, freshly painted and well maintained, but they were completely dark inside. No lights in any windows, no signs of human habitation. At the far end of the main street stood a wooden sign. "Thank you for visiting historic Jamestown. Drive safely." Beyond the sign, the road simply ended in a wall of forest. No through street, no connection to any other highway. Mike realized with growing panic that he'd have to turn around and drive back the way he came. Back through that tunnel of watching trees, back up that hill, back to the interstate that might not be there anymore. The return trip felt longer, much longer. Mike kept checking his odometer, but the numbers seemed wrong, jumping forward in increments that didn't match his speed or the time elapsed. His radio picked up nothing but static, and his cell phone showed no signal. The trees seemed closer now, branches scraping against his car with sounds like fingernails on metal. When Mike finally reached the interstate, he pulled over immediately and called 911. The dispatcher was polite, but confused. There was no Jamestown near Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania. No exit 78A. The exit numbers in that area went from 78 to 81, skipping 79 and 80 entirely due to the terrain. When Mike insisted he'd just driven through the town, the dispatcher suggested he might be experiencing fatigue and recommended he find a place to rest for the night. Mike drove to the next truck stop and asked the night clerk about Jamestown. The clerk, a local man in his 50s, went pale. "You didn't go down that road, did you?" he asked. When Mike nodded, the clerk shook his head gravely. "Folks around here know better. That exit's been showing up for years, but it don't lead anywhere good. Town burned down back in 1887, killed everybody. They say it shows up sometimes, especially on dark nights, trying to lure people in." The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation has no record of any exit 78A or any town called Jamestown in that area. However, historical records do show a small settlement called Jamestown that existed in the region during the late 1800s. The town was destroyed in a catastrophic fire in March 1887 that killed all 247 residents. The exact location of the settlement was lost when the railroad that served it was abandoned and the maps were updated. Mike's report wasn't unique. Between 2018 and 2022, at least 15 other drivers contacted Pennsylvania State Police about the mysterious exit. All described the same experience: a well-marked exit leading to a preserved 19th century town with gas lamp lighting and no signs of modern life. Several drivers reported taking photographs, but the images showed only empty forest. GPS data from their vehicles showed no deviation from the interstate route. The most disturbing aspect of these reports is their consistency. Witnesses describe identical details: the specific mile marker where the exit appears, the downhill road through dense forest, the Victorian and colonial architecture, the gas lamps, and the complete absence of any living inhabitants. All report the same overwhelming sense of being watched and the difficulty in finding the exit again on return trips. A Pennsylvania State Police investigation in 2020 found no physical evidence of any unauthorized exit ramp in the area. Aerial photography shows unbroken forest canopy. Ground surveys revealed no roads, structures, or clearings. Yet the reports continue, always describing the same impossible town that exists only in the gap between mile markers 77 and 78 on a stretch of highway that officially has no exits for 20 miles. Mike never encountered the exit again, despite driving that route monthly for the next 2 years. He changed his travel schedule to avoid driving through western Pennsylvania at night. But the memory of those empty streets and watching windows haunted him. In 2023, he switched to a different territory that didn't require him to use Interstate 80. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation eventually installed additional lighting and mile markers in the area, officially to improve driver safety and reduce confusion. Unofficially, according to a DOT worker who spoke anonymously, they were trying to eliminate the psychological conditions that led to the recurring reports. The extra lighting may have helped. There have been fewer sightings since 2022. However, the mystery of Jamestown remains unsolved. Local historians have confirmed that a town by that name did exist in the general area and was completely destroyed in 1887. The coincidence of the exit appearing exactly 134 years after the fire, always showing the same population number from the 1887 census, has never been explained. Whether the result of shared psychological phenomena, electromagnetic anomalies affecting GPS systems, or something more inexplicable, the phantom exit continues to challenge our understanding of what's possible on America's highways. Mike's experience serves as a reminder that even the most familiar routes can harbor mysteries. In an age of satellite navigation and comprehensive mapping, there are still places that exist in the gaps between certainty and impossibility, where the past and present intersect in ways that defy rational explanation. For those who travel America's highways at night, the lesson is clear. Not every exit leads where you expect, and some destinations are better left unexplored. Jennifer Walsh learned the hard way that some acts of kindness can trap you in a nightmare that defies all logic. It was August 12, 2022, when she picked up what appeared to be a stranded motorist on the desolate stretch of Route 285 between Roswell and Vaughn, New Mexico. What followed was a 12-hour ordeal that challenged everything she thought she knew about reality and left investigators with more questions than answers. Jennifer was driving north from Roswell to Albuquerque after visiting her sister, taking the back roads to avoid interstate traffic. Route 285 cuts through some of the most isolated terrain in New Mexico, endless stretches of high desert punctuated only by the occasional ranch gate or abandoned gas station. Cell phone coverage is spotty at best, and during daylight hours, you might go an hour without seeing another vehicle. At 3:20 p.m., approximately 15 miles north of Roswell, Jennifer spotted a figure standing beside a broken-down sedan on the shoulder. The car appeared to be a late-model Honda Civic with steam rising from under the hood. A woman in her 30s stood beside it, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, waving frantically at approaching traffic. Jennifer had passed dozens of cars without stopping, but something about this woman's obvious distress made her pull over. The woman introduced herself as Maria Santos and explained that her car had overheated. She needed to get to Santa Fe for a family emergency. Her mother was in the hospital and might not survive the night. She had no cell service and had been standing there for over an hour. Jennifer, a nurse herself, understood the urgency of family medical crises and offered to drive Maria to the next town where she could arrange alternative transportation. Maria climbed into the passenger seat, thanking Jennifer profusely. She was articulate and well-dressed, carrying only a small purse. She spoke knowledgeably about nursing, mentioning specific hospitals in Santa Fe and details about her mother's condition that sounded authentic. As they drove, Maria seemed genuinely grateful and kept checking the time, expressing worry about reaching her mother before it was too late. The first strange thing Jennifer noticed was that Maria cast no reflection in the rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light or the angle, but when she adjusted the mirror specifically to check, she could see the passenger seat clearly. But Maria wasn't visible in the reflection. When Jennifer glanced directly at her passenger, Maria was definitely there, solid and real, continuing their conversation about medical procedures and family obligations. 20 minutes into the drive, Jennifer's car radio began picking up what sounded like emergency dispatch calls. Through the static, she heard fragments. Missing person report, Maria Santos. Last seen, Route 285. Vehicle found abandoned. Jennifer turned up the volume, but the transmission faded into white noise. When she mentioned it to Maria, her passenger seemed not to hear, continuing to talk about her mother's condition. Jennifer tried to shake off her growing uneasiness. People's names aren't unique, and she might have misheard the garbled radio transmission. But as they approached the small town of Vaughn, Maria asked Jennifer to pull over at a gas station. She said she needed to use the restroom and buy some snacks for the long hospital vigil ahead. Jennifer parked near the building and watched Maria walk toward the entrance. Maria walked directly through the glass door without opening it. Jennifer sat frozen in her car, staring at the entrance. She could see Maria inside the store, moving around, apparently shopping. But the door had never opened. No automatic sensors, no handle turning, no sound of glass or metal. Maria had simply passed through solid glass, as if it weren't there. Jennifer's hands began shaking on the steering wheel as her rational mind struggled to process what she'd witnessed. When Maria returned to the car, again, without the door opening, she carried a bottle of water and a package of crackers. She seemed completely normal, resuming their conversation about her mother's prognosis. Jennifer drove in stunned silence, periodically glancing at her passenger, who appeared solid and real, but cast no reflection and apparently could walk through solid objects. As they continued north, Jennifer began noticing other impossible details. Maria's clothes showed no wrinkles despite hours in the car. She never shifted position, never seemed to breathe deeply, never showed any of the small, unconscious movements that living people make. Her purse sat on her lap in exactly the same position throughout the entire drive, and Jennifer never saw her open it or access its contents. The psychological pressure intensified when Jennifer's GPS began malfunctioning. The device kept recalculating their route, showing them driving through areas marked as road closed or no data available. According to the GPS, they were sometimes traveling on roads that didn't exist, through terrain marked as impassable wilderness. Yet the highway stretched ahead of them, real and solid under their tires. Near sunset, approximately 4 hours into the drive, Maria asked Jennifer to stop at a roadside memorial, one of those small crosses that mark fatal accident sites. Maria said she wanted to pay her respects to someone who had died there. The memorial was weathered and old, with faded plastic flowers and a small plaque. As Maria stood beside the cross, Jennifer could see her clearly in the golden evening light. But when she took a photo with her phone to document the moment, the image showed only the empty memorial against the desert landscape. Maria returned to the car and asked Jennifer to continue driving, but now her demeanor had changed. She became increasingly agitated about reaching Santa Fe, checking a watch that Jennifer couldn't see clearly, but which seemed to show impossible times, sometimes 3:00 a.m., sometimes 11:00. sometimes no time at all, just blank space where the numbers should be. As darkness fell, the psychological horror reached its peak. Maria began repeating the same phrases over and over. "I have to reach her before midnight," and "she's waiting for me at the hospital." But when Jennifer asked which hospital, Maria couldn't provide a name, just kept saying, "The one where she's dying," in a voice that was becoming less human with each repetition. The ordeal ended abruptly at 3:20 a.m., exactly 12 hours after Jennifer had picked up Maria. They were approaching the outskirts of Santa Fe when Maria suddenly said, "This is perfect. Thank you so much for everything." Jennifer pulled over at what appeared to be a random spot on the highway, nowhere near any hospital or populated area. Maria got out of the car, walked around to the driver's side window, and said, "I'll never forget your kindness." Then she simply wasn't there anymore, not fading, not walking away, just gone, as if she had never existed. Jennifer sat alone in her car on a dark highway, the passenger seat empty, no trace that anyone had been there. Her radio crackled back to normal operation. Her GPS resumed working correctly, and her cell phone showed full signal strength for the first time in 12 hours. Jennifer drove straight to the Santa Fe Police Department and filed a report. The desk sergeant was initially skeptical until Jennifer mentioned the name Maria Santos and Route 285. His expression changed immediately. He showed Jennifer a missing person file from 2019. Maria Santos, age 34, found dead in her overheated Honda Civic, 15 miles north of Roswell, after apparently trying to reach Santa Fe for a family emergency. She had died of heat stroke while waiting for help on Route 285. The file contained a photograph that matched Jennifer's passenger exactly. The New Mexico State Police have documented over 40 similar incidents since 2017. All involve motorists picking up a woman matching Maria Santos's description on Route 285, always near the spot where her body was found. The encounters follow an identical pattern: the helpful passenger who casts no reflection, the impossible physical phenomena, the 12-hour journey that ends with the passenger's sudden disappearance near Santa Fe. Investigators have found no logical explanation for these consistent reports. Security cameras at gas stations along the route show the reporting vehicles traveling alone, with no passenger visible. GPS data from the vehicles shows normal travel patterns, with no detours or anomalies. Yet the witnesses all describe identical experiences with precise detail, including conversations about specific medical procedures and hospital protocols that match Maria Santos's background as a certified nurse assistant. The most disturbing aspect is the psychological impact on witnesses. Every person who reports encountering Maria describes the same overwhelming sense of wrongness, the feeling that they're participating in something that violates the fundamental laws of reality. Several have required psychological counseling, not because of what they saw, but because of how completely normal the experience felt while it was happening. Jennifer never drove Route 285 again. She moved to Colorado 6 months later, citing an inability to feel safe on New Mexico highways. In her final statement to investigators, she said, "The scariest part wasn't that she was dead. It was that for 12 hours, she felt completely alive, and I was genuinely trying to help her reach her dying mother. Even knowing what I know now, if I saw her again tomorrow, I think I'd still stop. Because in that moment, her need felt absolutely real." The Maria Santos phenomenon continues to this day. The most recent report came in March 2023, following the same pattern: a helpful motorist, a 12-hour journey, and a passenger who vanishes without explanation after expressing gratitude for kindness received too late to matter. Route 285 remains one of New Mexico's most traveled highways, but those familiar with the Santos reports know to drive through that particular stretch without stopping, no matter who might be standing by the roadside, no matter how desperate their need appears. The case serves as a chilling reminder that some tragedies create echoes that transcend death, trapping both the departed and the living in cycles of unfinished business that logic cannot resolve and compassion cannot heal. Tom Rodriguez thought he was losing his mind until he started recording everything. It began as a simple road trip from Denver to Kansas City in November 2023, a route he'd driven dozens of times for his job as a freight coordinator. But somewhere in the endless wheat fields of central Kansas, Tom discovered a radio station that, according to every federal database and broadcasting authority, does not exist, yet continues to broadcast detailed information about travelers that it should have no way of knowing. The first encounter occurred at 11:47 p.m. on Interstate 70, roughly 30 miles east of Hays, Kansas. Tom was scanning radio stations to stay alert during the late-night drive when he picked up a clear signal at 88.3 FM. No static, no interference, just a smooth male voice with a slight Midwestern accent saying, "And for the driver of the blue Ford F-150 with Colorado plates currently passing mile marker 268, you might want to check your right rear tire. Looks like you picked up a nail about 15 miles back." Tom was driving a blue Ford F-150 with Colorado plates, and he was indeed approaching mile marker 268. His first thought was coincidence. Maybe the radio host had spotted his truck at a previous stop and was making a lucky guess. But when Tom pulled over and checked his tires with a flashlight, he found a roofing nail embedded in the right rear tire, slowly leaking air. The tire would have gone flat within the next 50 miles, potentially causing a dangerous blowout at highway speeds. Shaken but grateful, Tom continued driving while listening to what the DJ called KS88, your highway guardian. The station played a mix of classic rock and country music, interrupted periodically by traffic updates that were unnervingly specific. The host, who identified himself only as Marcus, provided real-time information about road conditions, weather, and potential hazards with an accuracy that seemed impossible. Eastbound traffic. Be advised, there's a deer carcass in the right lane at mile marker 289. Looks fresh. Probably happened within the last hour. And to the driver of the red Camaro who just passed the Hays exit, your left headlight is out. Kansas Highway Patrol has been active in this area tonight. Tom reached mile marker 289 20 minutes later and found the deer carcass exactly where Marcus had said it would be. He also passed a red Camaro pulled over with a Kansas Highway Patrol cruiser, blue lights flashing. Over the next hour, Marcus provided a steady stream of impossibly accurate information. He warned about a drunk driver weaving between lanes 15 minutes before Tom encountered the vehicle. He advised about a construction zone with unmarked lane closures that weren't posted on any traffic apps. He even mentioned a 24-hour diner at the next exit that served the best apple pie between Denver and Kansas City. Information that proved accurate when Tom stopped for coffee. The psychological unease began when Marcus started addressing Tom directly. "Ford F-150, Colorado plates. I see you stopped at the Triple Crown Diner. Good choice. Helen's been making pies there for 37 years. Tom was indeed at the Triple Crown Diner, and the waitress was indeed named Helen. When Tom asked her about the radio station, she looked confused. Never heard of any KS88, honey. We only get about 6 stations out here, and they're all AM. FM reception is terrible in this part of Kansas." Tom returned to his truck and tried to find the station again. 88.3 FM produced only static. He scanned the entire FM band twice. Nothing but dead air and distant signals bleeding through from Denver and Kansas City. But as soon as he pulled back onto I-70, Marcus's voice came through clearly. "Welcome back, Colorado. Hope you enjoyed Helen's coffee. You've got about 4 hours to Kansas City, and I'll be with you all the way." The truly disturbing part began when Marcus started revealing information he couldn't possibly know. "Tom, I know you're wondering how I know so much about you and your truck. The answer is simpler than you think. I see everything that happens on this highway. Every vehicle, every driver, every mile. Been watching this stretch of road for longer than you might imagine." Tom had never identified himself on the radio. He'd made no calls, sent no messages, interacted with no one who could have passed along his name. Yet Marcus not only knew his first name, but seemed to know intimate details about his life. "That wedding ring you keep spinning on your finger? Divorce papers were finalized 6 months ago, weren't they? That's why you're taking these long drives. Helps you think, helps you process the changes." Marcus was right. Tom had been divorced 6 months earlier, and had indeed been taking longer routes for his work trips, using the solitude to work through his emotional turmoil. But he'd never discussed this with anyone, certainly not with any radio personality in rural Kansas. The situation escalated when Marcus began describing Tom's exact location and movements in real time. "You're approaching mile marker 312 now, Tom. Notice how your hands are gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. That's normal. Most people get nervous when they realize they're being watched. But don't worry, I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to help." Tom's blood ran cold. He was indeed at mile marker 312, and he was indeed gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. He looked around frantically for any sign of surveillance. Cell towers, traffic cameras, aircraft overhead. Nothing but empty farmland stretching to the horizon under a star-filled sky. "I know you're looking for cameras, Tom. There aren't any. At least, not the kind you're thinking of. The highway sees everything, remembers everything. Some of us just learned how to listen to what it's trying to say." Tom tried changing the radio station, but every frequency produced the same result. Marcus's voice, clear and calm, continuing his impossible commentary. "You can't escape by changing stations, Tom. This isn't really about radio waves. It's about the road itself. And you're part of it now, whether you want to be or not." The psychological pressure became unbearable when Marcus began describing events from Tom's past that had occurred on this very stretch of highway. "Remember 3 years ago, Tom? You were driving this same route, and you saw that accident near Russell, the pickup truck that had rolled into the median. You stopped to help, called 911, stayed with the injured driver until paramedics arrived. The man lived because of your quick thinking." Tom remembered the incident vividly. He'd never reported his role in the rescue, never sought recognition. Only he, the injured driver, and the first responders knew he'd been involved. How could a radio DJ in rural Kansas know these details? The highway remembers kindness, Tom. It remembers cruelty too. But mostly, it remembers the people who truly care about the safety of others. That's why you can hear me when most people can't. The road chooses its listeners carefully. As Tom approached the outskirts of Kansas City, Marcus's signal began to fade. "This is where I have to leave you, Tom. My range doesn't extend into the city. Too much interference, too many other voices. But remember what you've learned tonight. The highway is alive in ways most people never realize. It watches, it remembers, and sometimes it tries to protect the good people who travel its length." The signal cut out completely as Tom entered the Kansas City metropolitan area. He immediately called the Federal Communications Commission to report the unlicensed broadcast, providing detailed information about the frequency and content. The FCC investigation found no registered station at 88.3 FM anywhere in Kansas. Direction-finding equipment detected no broadcast source in the area, Tom described. However, Tom's report wasn't unique. Since 2020, the FCC has received over 60 reports of similar encounters with KS-88 along Interstate 70 in Kansas. All describe the same phenomenon: a helpful DJ named Marcus, who provides impossibly accurate traffic information and seems to know intimate details about listeners' lives. The reports are remarkably consistent, down to specific phrases and the station's self-identification as your highway guardian. Kansas Department of Transportation investigated the reports and found an interesting correlation. Every person who reported hearing KS-88 had previously been involved in helping other motorists in distress along I-70. Some had stopped at accident scenes. Others had assisted stranded drivers. Still others had called in hazards or drunk drivers to authorities. All were what highway patrol officers describe as good Samaritans, people who go out of their way to help strangers on the road. The most unsettling aspect of the KS-88 phenomenon is its apparent selectivity. Researchers have driven the route with multiple people and recording equipment, but only certain individuals can hear the broadcasts. The ability seems unrelated to radio equipment, vehicle type, or atmospheric conditions. Those who hear Marcus describe the experience as profoundly unnerving, but ultimately beneficial. Many credit his warnings with preventing accidents or breakdowns. Tom continued to encounter KS-88 on subsequent trips through Kansas, though the experiences became less frequent. Marcus would check in occasionally, always with helpful information, always demonstrating impossible knowledge about Tom's circumstances. In his final report to investigators, Tom wrote, "I've stopped trying to rationalize it. Something watches over that highway, something that cares about keeping people safe. Whether it's technology beyond our understanding or something else entirely, I'm grateful it's there." The Federal Communications Commission officially classifies KS-88 as unexplained radio phenomena and continues to investigate reports. The broadcasts violate numerous federal regulations regarding unlicensed transmission. But enforcement is impossible when the source cannot be located. The station continues to operate, helping selected travelers navigate the lonely stretches of Interstate 70 through Kansas, a guardian angel whose existence cannot be proven, but whose assistance has saved countless lives along America's heartland highways. For those who travel I-70 through Kansas at night, the lesson is clear. Some help comes from sources we cannot understand, and some protections exist beyond the reach of rational explanation. The highway remembers those who help others, and sometimes, in ways that defy all logic, it finds a way to help them in return. Lisa Chen discovered that some places exist outside the normal flow of time on what should have been a routine drive from Phoenix to Albuquerque in September 2023. What began as a quick stop at a seemingly ordinary rest area on Interstate 40 turned into an 8-hour ordeal that officially lasted only 27 minutes, leaving investigators with documented evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of time and space. Lisa was an experienced long-distance driver, having made the Phoenix to Albuquerque route monthly for her job as a pharmaceutical sales representative. She knew every mile marker, every service plaza, every rest stop between the two cities. That's what made her experience at mile marker 233 so completely terrifying. She stopped at a facility that appeared on no official maps, spent most of a day there, and emerged to find that almost no time had passed in the outside world. The rest stop appeared suddenly in her headlights at 2:17 a.m., nestled in a grove of pine trees between Flagstaff and Winslow. Lisa had been driving for 6 hours and needed to stretch her legs and use the facilities. The area looked standard: a small parking lot, a modest brick building with restrooms, a few picnic tables, and a vending machine area. Solar-powered lights illuminated walkways lined with native Arizona vegetation. Nothing seemed unusual, except that Lisa couldn't remember seeing this particular rest stop before. The first sign something was wrong came when Lisa checked her phone after parking. The time displayed 2:17 a.m., but the display seemed frozen. The seconds weren't advancing, and the digital clock appeared stuck in place. She assumed it was a battery issue and entered the building to use the restroom. Inside, the facility was impeccably clean and well-maintained, with modern fixtures and that distinctive smell of industrial disinfectant common to highway rest stops. But something felt off about the lighting. It seemed too bright, too white, casting shadows that appeared to move independently of any light source. The building was completely silent, except for the hum of fluorescent bulbs and the distant sound of what might have been wind through the trees outside. Lisa used the restroom and was washing her hands when she noticed her reflection in the mirror was slightly delayed. She would move her hand, and the reflection would follow a split second later, like a video call with poor connection. When she waved deliberately, watching the mirror, the delay was unmistakable. Her reflection was living in the past by perhaps half a second. Disturbed but not yet panicked, Lisa left the building and walked to the vending machines. The selection was standard: soft drinks, snacks, coffee. But all the product labels showed dates from decades past. Coca-Cola cans displayed logos from the 1980s. Candy bars featured packaging discontinued years ago. The prices were impossibly low: 25 cents for a soda, 15 cents for a candy bar. Lisa tried to insert modern quarters, but the machines wouldn't accept them. The coins were apparently too new. The parking lot contained several other vehicles that Lisa hadn't noticed when she arrived. A 1970s Chevrolet Nova in mint condition, a 1980s Ford pickup truck with Arizona plates that showed a format discontinued in 1991, and a modern Honda Civic that looked identical to one Lisa had owned in college. All the vehicles appeared to be occupied, with people sitting motionless behind the wheels, but Lisa couldn't see their faces clearly through the tinted windows. Lisa walked back to her car, planning to leave immediately, but found her key fob wouldn't work. The doors were locked, and the electronic locks didn't respond to her remote. She tried the manual key, but it wouldn't turn in the lock, as if the car's security system was frozen in some intermediate state between locked and unlocked. Panic began to set in when Lisa realized she was trapped at a rest stop that shouldn't exist, surrounded by vehicles from different decades, unable to access her car or her phone. She approached the Honda Civic, thinking she might ask the driver for help, but when she knocked on the window, the person inside didn't respond. Through the glass, she could see a woman about her own age, sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead, hands on the steering wheel. The woman's clothes appeared to be from the early 2000s, low-rise jeans and a baby tee that Lisa remembered being popular during her college years. Lisa tried the other vehicles with the same result. Each contained a motionless driver from a different era, all sitting in identical poses, all completely unresponsive to her attempts to get their attention. The drivers appeared to be breathing. She could see the slight rise and fall of their chests, but they seemed to be in some kind of suspended animation. The psychological horror intensified when Lisa noticed that the sun had risen while she'd been exploring the rest stop. The sky was bright blue, birds were singing in the pine trees, and the temperature had warmed considerably. According to her internal clock, she'd been at the rest stop for at least 6 hours, watching a complete cycle from night to day, but her phone still showed 2:17 a.m., frozen at the exact moment she'd arrived. Lisa spent what felt like the entire day at the rest stop, exploring every inch of the facility. She found a maintenance shed behind the main building that contained equipment and supplies from various decades. Modern landscaping tools, next to push mowers from the 1960s, contemporary cleaning supplies alongside bottles with labels in fonts that hadn't been used since the 1970s. The shed had a calendar on the wall, but the pages were blank. No month, no year, no dates marked. As evening approached, though her phone still read 2:17 a.m., Lisa noticed movement in the other vehicles. The drivers were beginning to stir, slowly turning their heads, blinking as if waking from deep sleep. The woman in the Honda got out of her car and walked toward the building, moving with the deliberate pace of someone still partially unconscious. As she passed Lisa, she made eye contact and said, "How long this time?" in a voice that sounded hollow and distant. "This time?" Lisa asked, but the woman had already entered the building. Lisa followed her inside and found the restroom empty, though she'd seen the woman enter just seconds before. The building was exactly as it had been hours earlier. Clean, bright, and completely silent, except for the humming fluorescent lights. Lisa emerged from the building to find the parking lot empty, except for her own car. The other vehicles had vanished without a sound, leaving no tire tracks or any other evidence they had ever existed. Her key fob was working again, and when she checked her phone, the time had advanced to 2:44 a.m., exactly 27 minutes after she'd first arrived. Lisa drove away immediately, not stopping until she reached a truck stop in Winslow, where she called the Arizona Department of Transportation to report the incident. The dispatcher was polite but confused. There was no rest stop at mile marker 233 on Interstate 40. The nearest facilities were at Flagstaff and Winona, with nothing but empty desert in between. ADOT investigated Lisa's report and found no record of any rest facility at the location she described. Aerial photography showed undisturbed forest with no evidence of construction, paving, or infrastructure. Ground surveys revealed no buildings, parking lots, or utilities. Yet Lisa's cell phone data, extracted with her permission, showed a 27-minute gap in GPS tracking at the exact location she specified. Lisa's experience wasn't isolated. Since 2019, ADOT has received 37 similar reports from travelers on Interstate 40 between Flagstaff and Winslow. All describe the same phenomenon: a well-maintained rest stop that appears at night, contains vehicles and people from various decades, and creates a temporal displacement where hours pass subjectively while only minutes elapse in real time. The most disturbing pattern in these reports is the consistency of details. Witnesses describe identical architecture, the same delayed reflections in the mirrors, the same vintage vending machines, and encounters with the same motionless drivers. Several witnesses report seeing the woman in the Honda Civic, always wearing early 2000s clothing, always asking, "How long this time?" before disappearing into the building. ADOT's investigation revealed that the location where witnesses report the rest stop sits above a complex network of natural caves and underground water systems. Geological surveys have detected unusual electromagnetic anomalies in the area, possibly related to mineral deposits or underground water flow. Some researchers theorize that these natural phenomena might create conditions that affect human perception of time and space. The most compelling evidence came from a 2022 incident where two separate travelers, driving in opposite directions, both reported stopping at the Phantom Rest Stop at the same time. Their cell phone records confirmed they were both at the location simultaneously, but neither saw the other's vehicle. Both described spending hours at the facility, and emerging to find that less than 30 minutes had passed in real time. Lisa continues to drive the Phoenix-Albuquerque route for work, but she now plans her trips to avoid passing mile marker 233 during nighttime hours. In her final statement to investigators, she said, "The worst part wasn't being trapped there. It was the feeling that I was seeing something that exists outside normal time. A place where past and present get mixed up. Those people in the cars weren't ghosts. They were real people who had gotten caught in the same trap, maybe decades ago. And they're still there, waiting for time to start moving again." The Arizona Department of Transportation officially classifies the mile marker 233 reports as temporal perception anomalies, possibly related to driver fatigue and environmental factors. However, the department has installed additional lighting and emergency call boxes in the area, officially for enhanced driver safety. The Phantom Rest Stop continues to appear to selected travelers, offering a brief respite from the highway that costs hours of subjective time while stealing only minutes from the clock. For those who travel Interstate 40 through Arizona at night, the lesson is clear. Some stops on America's highways exist outside the normal flow of time, where past and present converge in ways that trap the unwary in moments that last forever, while the rest of the world moves on without them. David Park learned that some roads refuse to let you leave when he took what should have been a simple detour through Montana's backcountry in October 2023. Highway 200 between Great Falls and Missoula seemed like a scenic alternative to the interstate. But what began as a peaceful drive through Big Sky country became a nightmarish loop that followed him for hundreds of miles beyond Montana's borders, appearing impossibly on roads where it had no right to exist. David was driving from Seattle to Chicago, taking his time on a cross-country move to start a new job. He'd decided to avoid the monotony of Interstate 94 by taking Highway 200 through central Montana, a route he'd never traveled, but which promised spectacular views of the Rocky Mountain foothills. The October weather was perfect, with golden aspen leaves contrasting against snow-dusted peaks, and David was enjoying the solitude of rural Montana highways. The first anomaly occurred around 3:30 p.m. near the small town of Lincoln. David noticed that the mile markers along Highway 200 weren't progressing in the expected sequence. He'd passed mile marker 47, then 48, then inexplicably found himself approaching mile marker 45. Thinking he'd misread the signs, he paid closer attention to the next series. Mile marker 45 was followed by 46, then 44, then 47 again. The markers seemed to be arranged in a random pattern that defied any logical numbering system. David pulled over to check his GPS, which showed him traveling normally along Highway 200. But when he compared his actual location to the mile markers, nothing matched. According to his GPS, he should have been at mile marker 52, but the sign beside his car read mile marker 31. More disturbing, when he looked at satellite view on his phone, the highway appeared to curve and branch in ways that didn't match what he could see with his eyes. Assuming it was a GPS glitch or poorly maintained signage, David continued driving. But over the next hour, the discrepancies became more pronounced. Road signs advertised towns that didn't appear on any map. Millerville, 12 miles. Cedar Junction, population 89. Whispering Pines, historic district. When David tried to reach these destinations, the roads would curve back to Highway 200 without ever reaching the promised communities. The psychological unease began when David realized he'd been driving for over 4 hours without encountering another vehicle. Highway 200 typically carries moderate traffic, including logging trucks and tourist traffic heading to Glacier National Park. But David's highway was completely empty. No oncoming traffic, no vehicles behind him, no evidence that anyone else had used this road recently. As evening approached, David tried to exit Highway 200 at what his map showed as the junction with Highway 83 toward Kalispell. The exit ramp was there, clearly marked and properly constructed, but it led in a wide circle back to Highway 200. David tried the loop 3 times, each time following the ramp as it curved through a stand of pine trees, only to emerge back onto the same highway he'd tried to leave. Panic set in when David attempted to turn around and drive back toward Great Falls. The highway behind him looked identical to the highway ahead. Same asphalt, same guardrails, same forest on both sides. But after driving for 20 minutes in what he thought was the opposite direction, David passed the same distinctive rock formation he'd noticed hours earlier. Somehow, he was still traveling east, despite having made a complete U-turn. David's cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in rural Montana, but his car radio picked up only static across all frequencies. More disturbing, his fuel gauge hadn't moved despite hours of driving. The needle remained exactly where it had been when he'd entered Highway 200, as if his car wasn't consuming gasoline at normal rates. As darkness fell, David discovered that Highway 200's streetlights and reflectors provided perfect illumination, despite the road being in one of the most remote areas of Montana. The lighting seemed to extend infinitely in both directions, creating a tunnel of brightness through the forest that allowed him to drive at normal speeds, despite the late hour. But the light had an artificial quality that made the surrounding wilderness appear flat and lifeless, like a painted backdrop. The true horror began when David finally reached what appeared to be the end of Highway 200 at its junction with Interstate 90 near Missoula. He merged onto the interstate with enormous relief, grateful to see other traffic and normal highway infrastructure. But 20 miles down I-90, David encountered an impossible sight: a green highway sign reading Highway 200 East, Great Falls, 180 miles. David was certain he'd just left Highway 200. There was no way the road could intersect I-90 at 2 different points, 180 miles apart. But the exit was there, identical to dozens of other interstate exits, complete with proper signage and standard DOT construction. More vehicles were taking the exit, their drivers apparently seeing nothing unusual about a highway that shouldn't exist. David drove past the impossible exit and continued east on I-90, but Highway 200 continued to appear at regular intervals. Every 50 to 60 miles, another green sign would announce Highway 200 with different destinations and mileages. Sometimes it was Highway 200 north to Kalispell, sometimes Highway 200 south to Helena, sometimes just Highway 200, scenic route. Each exit looked legitimate and properly maintained. The phenomenon followed David beyond Montana's borders. In North Dakota, Highway 200 exits appeared on Interstate 94. In Minnesota, the highway intersected I-35 at multiple points. In Wisconsin, David found Highway 200 exits on state highways that had no connection to Montana's road system. Each time, the exits were perfectly constructed and appeared on David's GPS as legitimate highway junctions. David's ordeal lasted 3 days. No matter which route he took toward Chicago, Highway 200 would appear as an option, always promising to lead somewhere he needed to go, always featuring the same distinctive green signage and standard highway construction. Other drivers seemed to see the exits as well. David watched vehicles take the Highway 200 ramps without hesitation, as if they were normal parts of the interstate system. The nightmare ended abruptly when David reached the Chicago metropolitan area. As soon as he entered the urban sprawl of suburbs and shopping centers, the Highway 200 exits disappeared. His car's fuel gauge resumed normal operation. His cell phone regained signal. and his GPS showed only the roads that should actually exist in northern Illinois. David immediately contacted the Montana Department of Transportation to report his experience. The dispatcher was initially skeptical until David mentioned specific mile markers and road conditions along Highway 200. MDT had received similar reports over the past 4 years. Travelers who became trapped on Highway 200 for extended periods, experiencing impossible road configurations, and finding the highway appearing in states where it had no right to exist. Investigation revealed that Highway 200 in Montana does experience unusual traffic patterns. GPS data from cell phone companies shows vehicles entering the highway but not exiting at expected locations. Some cars appear to travel the entire length of Highway 200 in impossible timeframes, while others take hours longer than normal to complete the journey. The data suggests that different travelers experience drastically different versions of the same highway. The Montana Department of Transportation conducted extensive surveys of Highway 200, but found normal road conditions and standard mile marker sequences. However, they discovered that the highway was constructed over several abandoned railroad rights-of-way, some dating back to the 1880s. Historical records show that at least 3 different rail lines attempted to cross the same terrain, all eventually failing due to engineering challenges and financial difficulties. The most disturbing discovery came from archives of the Great Northern Railway. Company records from 1923 describe a phantom spur line that appeared on railroad maps but could never be located by survey crews. The spur was supposed to connect Great Falls and Missoula via a direct mountain route, but construction crews reported that surveyed lines would mysteriously change configuration overnight, leading to different destinations than originally planned. David never drove Highway 200 again, but he continued to encounter the road in nightmares for months afterward. In his final statement to investigators, he wrote, "It's not just a highway that traps you, it's a highway that learns about you. By the time I reached Chicago, I felt like the road knew exactly where I was going and was trying to convince me to take a different route. Even now, when I see highway signs, I check twice to make sure they're showing roads that actually exist." The Highway 200 phenomenon continues to generate reports from travelers across the northern United States. The road appears to have developed a persistence that extends far beyond Montana's borders, creating impossible exits and connections that lead drivers into loops of confusion and disorientation. Whether the result of geological anomalies affecting GPS systems, psychological phenomena related to isolated highway driving, or something more inexplicable, Highway 200 has become a cautionary tale about roads that refuse to let travelers complete their intended journeys. For those planning to drive through Montana's scenic backcountry, the lesson is clear. Some highways become more than transportation infrastructure. They become entities with their own agenda, capable of following travelers far beyond their intended boundaries and transforming familiar routes into mazes with no clear exit. Rachel Morrison discovered that some places exist in multiple time periods simultaneously when she stopped for gas at what appeared to be an ordinary roadside station on State Highway 90 in West Texas during July 2024. What began as a routine fuel stop became a terrifying journey through different decades, where the same location operated as various businesses across time, and where leaving proved nearly impossible once you understood what you were seeing. Rachel was driving from El Paso to San Antonio, taking the scenic route through the vast emptiness of West Texas desert. State Highway 90 cuts through some of the most desolate terrain in America. Hundreds of miles of creosote bush and scrubland broken only by distant mountain ranges and the occasional ranch gate. It was the kind of landscape that made travelers grateful for any sign of civilization, which is why Rachel felt relieved when she spotted a gas station appearing through the heat shimmer at 2:30 p.m. The station looked standard from a distance, a single-story building with large windows, gas pumps under a metal canopy, and a tall sign visible from miles away. But as Rachel pulled into the lot, she noticed details that didn't quite match. The building's architecture seemed to shift depending on her viewing angle, sometimes appearing as a modern convenience store, sometimes as a 1970s-era service station with garage bays, sometimes as what looked like a 1950s filling station with rounded corners and Art Deco styling. Rachel parked at what appeared to be a standard modern gas pump and tried to use her credit card. The pump's display was old-fashioned, showing prices in dollars and cents, with mechanical number wheels instead of digital readouts. The price per gallon read 39 cents, which Rachel assumed was a malfunction. But when she went inside to prepay, the elderly attendant behind the counter quoted the same price and seemed genuinely confused when Rachel offered a $20 bill. "Haven't seen one of those new bills in quite a while," the man said, examining the currency. "This some kind of collector's item? We don't usually get bills with all these fancy security features." The attendant appeared to be in his 60s, wearing coveralls with a name patch reading Earl, and spoke with the slow drawl of someone who'd lived in West Texas his entire life. Rachel looked around the store's interior, which seemed to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. Near the entrance, she saw modern energy drinks and cell phone chargers. But deeper in the store, the shelves held products from decades past. Glass bottles of Coca-Cola with pull-tab tops, candy bars with packaging she remembered from childhood, and magazines with cover dates from the 1980s and 1990s. The fluorescent lighting cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently, creating zones where different eras overlapped. When Rachel asked Earl about the unusual merchandise, he looked puzzled. "Unusual how? We carry the same stuff we've always carried. Of course, inventory changes over the years. Some products come and go. You know how it is." But as he spoke, Rachel noticed that Earl himself seemed to flicker between different appearances. Sometimes he looked like the elderly man who'd first served her, sometimes younger, sometimes wearing different clothes entirely. Rachel paid for her gas with exact change from her purse. Thankfully, she had enough quarters and dimes to cover the impossibly low price. But when she returned to her car, the gas pump had changed. Instead of the digital display she'd seen earlier, it now featured a mechanical meter with spinning dials and a bell that rang with each gallon pumped. The pump handle was heavier, more substantial, made of metal instead of plastic. As Rachel filled her tank, she noticed other customers at the station who seemed to be from different time periods. A man in 1950s clothing was washing the windshield of a pristine Chevrolet Bel Air at the next pump. A woman in 1970s attire was checking the oil in a Ford Pinto. A family in 1990s clothing was loading groceries into a wood-paneled station wagon. None of these people acknowledged Rachel's presence, and their vehicles appeared and disappeared depending on which direction she looked. The psychological horror intensified when Rachel tried to leave. Her car started normally, but as she pulled onto Highway 90, she found herself approaching the same gas station from the opposite direction. The building looked different now, more modern, with LED price displays and contemporary architecture, but it was definitely the same location. Rachel drove past without stopping, but after 10 minutes of highway driving, the station appeared again, this time looking like a 1960s truck stop with a diner attached. Rachel pulled over and called 911, but her cell phone showed no signal, despite having full bars just minutes earlier. She could see the gas station in her rearview mirror, maybe a quarter-mile back. But now it appeared to be a 1940s-era service station with a single pump and a hand-painted sign. The building seemed to be cycling through different incarnations, showing her glimpses of the same location across multiple decades. Desperate to escape, Rachel drove for what felt like hours, but the gas station continued to appear at regular intervals. Sometimes it was ahead of her, sometimes behind, sometimes visible off to one side on roads that shouldn't exist. Each appearance showed a different era of the same business. A Depression-era filling station, a 1950s full-service garage, a 1960s truck stop, a 1970s convenience store, and occasionally the modern version she'd first encountered. The nightmare reached its peak when Rachel realized that other travelers were experiencing the same loop. She could see vehicles from different decades, all heading toward or away from various incarnations of the gas station. A 1930s pickup truck would disappear into heat shimmer, just as a 1980s sedan materialized from a different direction. All the drivers looked confused and desperate, trapped in the same impossible cycle. Rachel's ordeal ended when she noticed a pattern in the station's appearances. The building seemed to cycle through its different eras in chronological order, spending exactly 13 minutes in each time period before shifting to the next. During the brief transitions between eras, Rachel could see the raw desert with no station at all, just empty highway stretching to the horizon. Waiting for the next transition, Rachel gunned her engine and drove through the empty space where the station would materialize. For a moment, she felt as if she was driving through thick air that resisted her movement. Then she was through, back on normal Highway 90, with the gas station nowhere in sight behind her. Rachel drove straight to the nearest town, Marfa, about 40 miles east, and reported her experience to the local sheriff's office. The deputy who took her statement seemed unsurprised. "We get reports about that place every few months," he said. "Different folks, same story. Thing is, there ain't supposed to be no gas station on that stretch of highway. Hasn't been one there for over 30 years. Investigation by the Texas Department of Transportation revealed that Rachel's description matched the location of several different businesses that had operated at the same highway intersection over the decades. Records showed a service station built there in 1938, expanded into a garage in the 1950s, converted to a truck stop in the 1960s, and finally demolished in 1987 when the highway was rerouted slightly to avoid flooding issues. The most disturbing discovery came from examining property records and old photographs. Every business described by witnesses had actually existed at that location during the time periods they reported seeing. The 39-cent gas prices Rachel remembered were accurate for 1974. The architectural details she described matched photographs of the various businesses that had operated there over 5 decades. Texas DOT has documented over 20 similar reports since 2021. All describe the same phenomenon: a gas station that appears in different incarnations from the past, trapping travelers in temporal loops until they figure out how to escape during the brief moments when the location reverts to empty desert. Several witnesses report interacting with employees and customers from different eras, all of whom seem unaware that they're operating in the wrong time period. The most unsettling aspect is the consistency of details across different witnesses. People describe the same employee names, the same product inventory for specific decades, and identical architectural features. Some witnesses have provided receipts or taken photographs, but the images show only empty desert when developed or viewed later. Rachel never drove Highway 90 through that area again, taking Interstate 10 for all subsequent trips across West Texas. In her final statement to investigators, she wrote, "The scariest part wasn't being trapped in the loop. It was realizing that all those different time periods were happening simultaneously in the same place. Past, present, maybe even future, all existing together. It made me wonder how many other places are like that, showing us only one layer of what's really there. The Texas Department of Transportation officially classifies the reports as environmental perception anomalies related to heat distortion and driver fatigue in remote desert conditions. However, the department has installed additional mile markers and emergency call boxes in the area and regularly patrols the stretch of highway where the incidents occur. The phantom gas station continues to appear to selected travelers, offering a glimpse into the layered history of roadside America, where past and present intersect in impossible ways. For those who drive the lonely highways of West Texas, the lesson is clear. Some places refuse to stay buried in the past, continuing to serve customers from across the decades in an endless cycle that traps the unwary in moments that should have ended long ago. Marcus Thompson thought he understood the rhythms of long-haul trucking until he encountered a convoy that had been driving the same route for over 40 years without ever reaching its destination. What began as a routine overnight haul from Denver to Chicago in March 2024 became a 12-hour nightmare where Marcus found himself trapped among ghost trucks carrying cargo that should have been delivered decades ago, driven by men who refused to acknowledge they were already dead. Marcus had been an over-the-road trucker for 15 years, hauling everything from electronics to frozen foods across the American heartland. He knew Interstate 80 through Nebraska like his own backyard. Every truck stop, every way station, every mile marker between the Colorado border and Iowa. That's what made his encounter near mile marker 126 so terrifying. He joined a convoy of 18-wheelers that shouldn't exist, carrying freight for companies that had gone out of business before Marcus was born. It started at 11:43 p.m. on a moonless night in early March. Marcus was eastbound on I-80, about 50 miles west of North Platte, when he noticed unusual CB radio chatter. Instead of the typical mix of traffic updates and casual conversation, he was hearing discussions about delivery schedules and cargo manifests that made no sense. Drivers were talking about hauling goods to stores that had closed decades ago, referencing truck stops that had been demolished years earlier. Breaker 19, this is Roadmaster heading to the old Woolworth Distribution Center in Des Moines. Anyone know if they're still running that night shift loading dock? The voice was clear and professional, but Woolworth had gone out of business in 1997. Marcus checked his CB to make sure he was on channel 19, but the display showed he was receiving the transmission normally. Marcus first saw the convoy in his mirrors, a line of tractor trailers stretching back into the darkness, their headlights creating a river of light across the Nebraska prairie. At first, he assumed it was a normal freight convoy, probably heading to the same Chicago area distribution centers he served. But as the trucks began passing him, Marcus noticed details that made his blood run cold. The lead truck was a 1970s-era Peterbilt in pristine condition, painted in the blue and white colors of a trucking company Marcus vaguely remembered from his childhood. The trailer bore the logo of Interstate Freight Lines, a company that had been bought out and dissolved in the 1980s. Behind it came a 1960s Kenworth, pulling a trailer marked Continental Express, another long-defunct carrier. Each truck in the convoy represented a different era of American trucking, all in perfect mechanical condition, despite their obvious age. The drivers were equally anachronistic. Marcus could see them clearly through their cab windows. Men in clothing styles from different decades, all focused intently on the road ahead. Some wore the polyester shirts and wide ties popular in the 1970s. Others sported the flannel and denim favored by truckers in the 1980s. A few wore the simple work clothes of an earlier era, complete with suspenders and flat caps. Marcus tried to make contact over the CB, but the convoy drivers seemed to operate on a different frequency despite using Channel 19. He could hear their conversations, but they couldn't hear his transmissions. They discussed road conditions, weather reports, and delivery schedules with the casual professionalism of experienced drivers, but their information was decades out of date. This is Midnight Express approaching the Grand Island truck stop. Anyone know if they still got that all-night diner with the apple pie? My logbook says I got time for a 30-minute break. The Grand Island truck stop the driver referenced had been demolished in 1992 and replaced with a modern travel center that looked nothing like the classic truck stops of earlier decades. The psychological horror began when Marcus realized the convoy was maintaining impossible speeds. His speedometer showed 65 mph, but the landscape was flying past at what felt like 90 or 100 mph. Mile markers flashed by in rapid succession, yet the convoy maintained perfect formation around his truck. More disturbing, Marcus's odometer wasn't advancing. Despite hours of high-speed driving, the mileage reading remained exactly what it had been when he first encountered the convoy. Marcus tried to exit the convoy by taking the off-ramp at Big Springs, but his truck wouldn't respond to steering input. The wheel turned normally, but the vehicle continued straight ahead, locked into formation with the ghost convoy. His brakes had no effect either. The truck maintained speed and position, as if controlled by some external force. The convoy's CB chatter revealed increasingly disturbing details about their endless journey. The drivers discussed the same delivery runs they'd been making for decades, always heading to destinations that no longer existed, carrying cargo for companies that had vanished from the business landscape. They talked about familiar truck stops, restaurants, and motels that had been torn down or abandoned years ago, as if these places still operated normally. Breaker for eastbound convoy. This is Chrome Horse pulling a reefer load of TV dinners for the A&P warehouse in Council Bluffs. ETA still showing Thursday morning, but my calendar seems stuck on Tuesday. Anyone else having trouble with their dates? The driver's voice carried genuine confusion, but A&P grocery stores had closed their last location in 2015. As dawn broke across the Nebraska prairie, Marcus could see the full extent of the convoy. Over 50 trucks, spanning several decades of American transportation history. Some trailers carried obsolete cargo, crates marked for department stores that had been demolished, pallets destined for factories that had moved overseas, shipments addressed to businesses that existed only in old phone directories. The nightmare reached its climax when Marcus noticed that the convoy was driving through landscape that didn't match his memory of Interstate 80. The highway had extra lanes that shouldn't exist, passed through small towns that had been bypassed by interstate construction decades earlier, and featured rest stops and service areas that predated the modern highway system. Marcus realized he was seeing Interstate 80 as it had existed in different eras, driving through a version of Nebraska that combined infrastructure from multiple decades. The convoy was following routes that had been altered or abandoned, visiting truck stops that existed only in the memories of retired drivers, delivering to destinations that time had erased. The ordeal ended abruptly at sunrise, when the convoy reached what appeared to be the Iowa border. As the first truck crossed the state line, it simply faded away like morning mist. One by one, the entire convoy vanished in order, leaving Marcus alone on a normal stretch of Interstate 80, with his truck operating normally for the first time in 12 hours. Marcus immediately drove to the nearest truck stop and reported his experience to both the Nebraska State Patrol and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The investigating officers were initially skeptical, until Marcus provided specific details about the trucking companies and cargo descriptions he'd observed. Every company he mentioned had indeed operated on I-80 through Nebraska during the time periods he described. The FMCSA investigation revealed that Marcus's account matched reports from other drivers dating back to 2018. All described encounters with convoys of vintage trucks carrying outdated cargo, always traveling eastbound on I-80 through central Nebraska, always vanishing at the Iowa border. The consistency of details across multiple witnesses was remarkable. Drivers reported seeing the same trucking company logos, the same vintage equipment, and hearing identical CB conversations. Research into trucking industry history revealed a disturbing pattern. Many of the companies described by witnesses had suffered major accidents or financial disasters along the same stretch of highway where the Phantom Convoy appears. Interstate Freight Lines lost 3 drivers in a 1979 winter storm. Continental Express went bankrupt after a series of hijackings in the early 1980s. Several other companies mentioned by witnesses had experienced tragedies that ended their operations on this route. The most chilling discovery came from examining old accident reports. Between 1965 and 1985, Interstate 80 through central Nebraska was the site of numerous fatal trucking accidents. Many involved drivers who were found to have been operating far beyond legal driving hours, apparently attempting to complete delivery schedules that were impossible to maintain safely. Marcus continued trucking, but changed his routes to avoid overnight drives through central Nebraska. In his final statement to investigators, he wrote, "Those drivers aren't trying to hurt anyone. They're just trying to finish their runs, deliver their loads, complete the jobs they started decades ago. But they're trapped in a cycle where the destinations don't exist anymore, and the roads keep changing underneath them. It's like they're driving through a map of America that only exists in the past." The Nebraska State Patrol has increased nighttime patrols along the affected stretch of Interstate 80, officially to assist stranded motorists, but privately to monitor for reports of the Phantom Convoy. The convoy continues to appear to selected drivers, always following the same pattern. Vintage trucks carrying obsolete cargo, driven by men who died decades ago, but refuse to stop working. For those who drive America's freight corridors at night, the lesson is clear. Some drivers never retire, never rest, and never reach their final destinations. They continue hauling loads along routes that exist only in memory, trapped in an endless cycle of deliveries to a version of America that disappeared long ago, but refuses to acknowledge its own obsolescence. Ashley Martinez learned that some motels never let their guests check out when she pulled into what appeared to be a quaint roadside lodge on Highway 6 in central Utah during August 2023. What should have been a simple overnight stay became a 3-day psychological nightmare where Ashley discovered she was trapped in a motel that existed simultaneously in multiple decades, filled with guests who had checked in years ago and could never find their way back to the present. Ashley was driving from Denver to Las Vegas for a friend's wedding, taking the scenic mountain route through Utah's backcountry. Highway 6 cuts through some of the most spectacular and isolated terrain in the American West, winding through canyons and over mountain passes with very few services between small towns. When a sudden thunderstorm hit near Soldier Summit around 9 p.m., Ashley was grateful to see the neon sign of the Mountain View Motor Inn glowing through the rain. The motel looked like a classic 1950s roadside lodge, a single-story building with rooms arranged in an L shape around a small parking lot, each door painted in cheerful turquoise with white trim. A separate office building sat at the entrance, topped by a tall sign featuring a cowboy on horseback and the promise of clean rooms, color TV, air conditioning. The neon buzzed and flickered in the rain, casting pink and blue reflections on the wet asphalt. Ashley parked near the office and ran through the downpour to the front desk. The lobby was warm and inviting, decorated with vintage Western artwork and furnished with leather chairs that looked well-maintained despite their obvious age. Behind the counter stood a pleasant woman in her 50s, wearing a floral dress that seemed to belong to an earlier decade. Her name tag read Dorothy in cheerful script lettering. "Terrible night to be driving, honey," Dorothy said with a genuine smile. "You're lucky we have a room available. Most nights we're full up with travelers who got caught by the weather." She quoted a rate of $12 per night, which Ashley assumed was a mistake until Dorothy showed her the printed rate card. All the prices seemed frozen in time. $6 for a single, $12 for a double, $15 for a family suite. Ashley paid with cash, thinking the motel might not accept credit cards, and received an old-fashioned metal key attached to a large plastic diamond with the room number 7 embossed in gold. Dorothy handed her a registration card to fill out, using a fountain pen that left blue ink stains on Ashley's fingers. The carbon paper beneath the card was yellow with age, and the form itself looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1960s. Room 7 was exactly what Ashley expected from a vintage motor court. Wood-paneled walls, a quilted bedspread in harvest gold, and a small television with rabbit ear antennas. But everything was immaculately clean and well-maintained, as if the room had been preserved in perfect condition since the day it opened. The air conditioning worked perfectly, though it was a window unit that should have been replaced decades ago. Ashley settled in for the night, but sleep proved impossible due to the sounds from neighboring rooms. She could hear conversations through the thin walls, families discussing travel plans, couples arguing about directions, children complaining about being bored. But the conversations seemed oddly dated, referencing places and events from years or decades past. From room 6, she heard a man telling his wife about their plans to visit the Seattle World's Fair next month. But the Seattle World's Fair had occurred in 1962. From room 8, a family was discussing their excitement about seeing Disney's new animated movie, The Little Mermaid, when they reached California. But that film had been released in 1989. The conversations continued throughout the night, an overlapping mix of vacation plans and travel discussions spanning multiple decades. Ashley tried to sleep, but the temporal displacement of the overheard conversations created a growing sense of unease. She looked out her window and saw other guests walking around the parking lot, families in clothing styles from different eras, all seeming to exist simultaneously in the same space. A man in a 1970s leisure suit was washing the windshield of a pristine muscle car. A family in 1980s vacation wear was unloading luggage from a wood-paneled station wagon. The next morning, Ashley went to the office to check out, but Dorothy seemed confused by the request. "Check out? But honey, you just got here last night. Most of our guests stay for several days while they're passing through. Are you sure you wouldn't like to extend your stay? The weather's supposed to clear up beautifully." Ashley insisted she needed to leave for Las Vegas, but when she walked to her car, the keys wouldn't work. The engine would turn over but wouldn't start, despite having run perfectly the night before. When she returned to the office to ask about local mechanics, Dorothy suggested she relax and enjoy another day at the Mountain View. "Cars can be temperamental in mountain weather," she said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes they just need a little rest." The psychological horror began when Ashley realized she couldn't remember exactly how she'd found the motel. Highway 6 was the route she'd intended to take, but she couldn't recall seeing the Mountain View Motor Inn on any of her previous trips through Utah. When she asked Dorothy about the motel's history, the proprietor became vague and evasive, changing the subject to local attractions and dining recommendations. Ashley spent the day exploring the motel grounds, discovering details that defied logical explanation. The guest registry in the lobby contained entries spanning decades, with handwriting styles and paper types from different eras. Some entries were dated from the 1960s, others from the 1980s, some from the early 2000s, but all appeared to have been written recently, the ink still fresh and bright. The other guests seemed trapped in their respective time periods, discussing current events from decades past as if they were happening now. A businessman in a 1990s suit complained about gas prices reaching an outrageous $1.50 per gallon. A family from the 1980s worried about getting home in time to watch the series finale of Mass C. None of the guests seemed aware that they were living in the wrong decade. The most disturbing discovery came when Ashley found a collection of abandoned vehicles behind the main building. Cars from every decade since the 1950s sat in neat rows, all in various states of mechanical failure. License plates from different states and eras created a timeline of American automotive history. Many of the vehicles matched the cars she'd seen other guests driving around the parking lot. Ashley's attempts to call for help were unsuccessful. Her cell phone showed no signal, despite having worked fine before arriving at the motel. The room's telephone connected only to the front desk, where Dorothy would cheerfully offer to help with any problems, but seemed unable to understand Ashley's desire to leave. "But dear, you haven't even seen our beautiful mountain views yet. Most guests love to stay and enjoy the scenery." On her second night, Ashley discovered that she wasn't the only guest trying to escape. Around midnight, she heard knocking on her door and found a man in his 30s wearing clothes from the early 2000s. He introduced himself as Kevin and explained that he'd been trying to leave the mountain view for what felt like 3 years, though he'd only paid for one night. "The thing is," Kevin said, "I can't tell if it's really been 3 years or if it just feels that long. Time moves differently here. Sometimes I'll go to sleep and wake up, and Dorothy will act like I just checked in. Other times, I'll have conversations with guests about things that happened decades before I was born, but they talk about it like it's current news." Kevin showed Ashley around the motel after dark, revealing aspects invisible during daylight hours. The building seemed to extend beyond its apparent dimensions, with corridors that led to wings that shouldn't exist. Some rooms contained guests from the 1950s and 1960s, still waiting for phone calls about job interviews or discussing plans to buy their first television set. Others held families from the 1970s and 1980s, planning vacations to destinations that had changed dramatically or no longer existed. The escape came on Ashley's third morning when she noticed a pattern in the motel's operation. Dorothy and the other staff seemed to experience brief moments of confusion around sunrise, as if they were struggling to remember which decade they were supposed to be operating in. During these transition periods, the motel's temporal hold weakened. Ashley waited for the next morning's confusion and managed to hotwire her car using techniques her mechanically inclined brother had taught her. As Dorothy stood in the office doorway, looking lost and disoriented, Ashley drove away as fast as possible. In her rearview mirror, she watched the Mountain View Motor Inn fade into the morning mist until it completely disappeared. Ashley drove straight to the Utah State Bureau of Investigation in Salt Lake City and filed a missing person report, not for herself, but for Kevin and the other guests she'd left behind. The investigating detective was initially skeptical until Ashley provided specific details about the motel's location and the guests she'd encountered. Research revealed that several people matching her descriptions had indeed gone missing along Highway 6 over the past several years. The Utah State Bureau of Investigation found no record of any Mountain View Motor Inn operating along Highway 6. Historical research revealed that a motel by that name had operated in the area from 1954 to 1987, when it was destroyed in a fire that killed several guests who were unable to escape their rooms. The site had been cleared and never rebuilt, remaining empty land for over 30 years. Ashley's report matched testimony from at least 12 other travelers who claimed to have stayed at the Phantom Motel since 2019. All described identical experiences: vintage decor, impossibly low prices, guests from different decades, and great difficulty leaving. Several reported encountering the same staff members and guest registry entries that Ashley had described. The most unsettling aspect of these reports is their consistency across different witnesses. People describe the same room layouts, the same staff conversations, and encounters with identical guests from past decades. Some witnesses have provided receipts or taken photographs, but the images show only empty desert when developed or viewed later. Ashley never drove Highway 6 through that area again, taking Interstate 15 for all subsequent trips through Utah. In her final statement to investigators, she wrote, "The scariest part wasn't being trapped there. It was realizing that all those people from different decades were still living their lives, completely unaware that time had moved on without them. They're still planning vacations to places that don't exist anymore, still worried about events that happened decades ago. And somewhere in that motel, Kevin is probably still trying to find a way home." The Utah State Bureau of Investigation officially classifies the Mountain View Motor Inn reports as environmental disorientation incidents related to altitude and isolation in remote mountain areas. However, the Bureau has installed additional emergency call boxes along Highway 6 and increased patrols in the area where incidents are reported. The Phantom Motel continues to appear to selected travelers, offering comfortable accommodations at prices from a bygone era while trapping guests in temporal loops that prevent them from returning to their own time. For those who drive Utah's remote mountain highways, the lesson is clear. Some places offer hospitality that lasts far longer than intended, and some check-ins become permanent residents in hotels that exist outside the normal flow of time. Jordan Hayes discovered that some reflections show not what is, but what will be, during a seemingly routine drive from Sacramento to Los Angeles in November 2023. What began as a standard business trip became a terrifying race against time when Jordan's rearview mirror started displaying graphic images of fatal accidents that hadn't happened yet, but would occur exactly as shown unless the depicted drivers could be warned in time. Jordan was a sales manager for a medical device company, making the I-5 run between Northern and Southern California twice monthly for over 8 years. The Central Valley stretch of Interstate 5 was as familiar as Jordan's own driveway. Endless miles of flat farmland, punctuated by the occasional truck stop or agricultural town. It was the kind of drive that allowed the mind to wander, which made the mirror's impossible visions all the more shocking when they began appearing just south of Stockton. The first vision occurred at 2:47 p.m. near mile marker 461. Jordan glanced in the rearview mirror to check traffic, and instead of seeing the normal view of highway behind, witnessed a horrific accident unfolding in vivid detail. A red pickup truck was losing control on wet pavement, sliding sideways across 3 lanes before flipping multiple times and catching fire. The image was so clear and realistic that Jordan instinctively hit the brakes, thinking the crash was happening immediately behind. But when Jordan looked over his shoulder, the highway was clear. No accident, no red pickup truck, no emergency vehicles. Just normal afternoon traffic flowing smoothly southbound. Jordan adjusted the mirror, thinking it might be reflecting something from a different angle, but it showed only the expected view of following cars and empty road. 20 minutes later, Jordan heard the accident report on the radio. Major injury collision on southbound I-5 near Manteca, involving a red pickup truck that lost control and overturned. All lanes currently blocked. The description matched exactly what Jordan had seen in the mirror, occurring at the precise location where the vision had indicated. Jordan pulled over at the next rest stop, hands shaking, trying to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps the mirror had somehow reflected an accident happening on the northbound side, or maybe there was a logical explanation involving refracted light or atmospheric conditions. But as Jordan examined the rear view mirror in the bright afternoon sun, it looked completely normal, just a standard automotive mirror showing the parking lot behind the car. The second vision came an hour later near Fresno. This time, the mirror showed a massive multi-vehicle pileup involving a tour bus, several passenger cars, and a tanker truck. Jordan watched in horror as the bus driver apparently fell asleep at the wheel, drifting into the median barrier and jackknifing across all lanes. Cars behind the bus had no time to stop, creating a chain reaction that involved at least 12 vehicles. The tanker truck, trying to avoid the wreckage, rolled over and began leaking fuel across the highway. The vision was so detailed that Jordan could read license plates and see the expressions of terror on passengers' faces. But again, when Jordan looked directly behind, traffic was flowing normally. No bus, no tanker truck, no signs of impending disaster. Jordan immediately called 911 to report a potential accident, but the dispatcher asked for a location and description of current conditions. How could Jordan explain seeing an accident that hadn't happened yet? Instead, Jordan tried calling in anonymous tips to the highway patrol about a drowsy driver in a tour bus and dangerous tanker truck driving erratically. But without specific mile markers or license plate information, the reports were treated as routine traffic complaints. 45 minutes later, the radio confirmed Jordan's worst fears. Multiple fatality accident on southbound I-5 near Fresno, involving a tour bus and tanker truck. Highway expected to remain closed for several hours. The psychological impact was devastating. Jordan realized the mirror was somehow showing future accidents with perfect accuracy, but the visions came too late to prevent them and with insufficient detail to provide effective warnings. It was like being forced to watch a preview of tragedies that were already set in motion, powerless to change their outcome. The third vision was different. At 5:23 p.m., approaching Bakersfield, the mirror showed an accident that was clearly about to happen within minutes. A white sedan in the fast lane had a tire blowout, causing the driver to lose control and veer directly into the path of a motorcycle. The motorcyclist, a young woman wearing a distinctive red helmet, had no time to react. The collision was brutal and instantly fatal. But this vision showed something the others hadn't: clear license plate numbers for both vehicles and a mile marker visible in the background. Jordan had specific information and, more importantly, time to act. The white sedan was 3 cars ahead in the left lane, and Jordan could see the motorcycle approaching from behind at high speed. Jordan immediately moved to the right lane and began flashing headlights while honking frantically, trying to get the sedan driver's attention. When that failed, Jordan accelerated and pulled alongside the white car, rolling down the window and shouting warnings about the tire. The driver looked confused, but began to slow down and move toward the shoulder. At that moment, Jordan heard the distinctive sound of a tire blowout from behind. In the mirror, the normal mirror, not the prophetic one, Jordan could see the white sedan safely on the shoulder, with hazard lights flashing. The motorcycle passed by in the left lane, the rider in the red helmet completely unaware of how close she had come to death. The prevention of this accident changed something fundamental about the mirror's visions. Instead of showing completed tragedies, it began displaying potential accidents with increasing detail about their timing and location. Jordan spent the next 2 hours of the drive frantically calling 911 dispatch centers, trucking companies, and emergency services, providing specific information about impending accidents. CHP dispatch, I know this sounds crazy, but there's going to be a serious accident on southbound I-5 at mile marker 278 in approximately 12 minutes. White Honda Civic, license plate 7G4J892, will have a medical emergency and cross the median into oncoming traffic. Jordan's calls were initially dismissed as pranks, but when the accidents occurred exactly as predicted, dispatchers began taking the reports seriously. By the time Jordan reached Los Angeles, the mirror had shown 17 different accidents. Jordan had successfully prevented 5 of them by providing specific warnings to authorities. The other 12 occurred as predicted, but emergency services were pre-positioned and response times were dramatically reduced, saving several lives that would otherwise have been lost. The mirror's visions stopped as soon as Jordan entered the Los Angeles metropolitan area, returning to normal reflective function. Jordan immediately drove to the nearest CHP station and filed a detailed report about the day's experiences. The investigating officer was initially skeptical until Jordan provided specific details about accidents that had been logged throughout the day, including incidents that hadn't been reported on news radio. California Highway Patrol investigation revealed that Jordan's reports had been remarkably accurate. Every accident described had occurred at the predicted time and location, with the exact vehicles and circumstances specified. The 5 accidents that had been prevented were confirmed by follow-up investigations. The warned drivers all reported near misses or mechanical failures that could have resulted in serious crashes. The CHP investigation uncovered similar reports from other drivers dating back to 2020. All involved the same stretch of Interstate 5 through the Central Valley, and all described rear-view mirrors that showed future accidents instead of current traffic conditions. The consistency of details across multiple witnesses was remarkable, particularly since none of the reporting drivers knew each other or had communicated about their experiences. Research into the highway's construction history revealed that the affected stretch of I-5 had been built over the site of a major rail disaster from 1947. A passenger train had derailed while crossing a bridge over the San Joaquin River, killing 23 people and injuring dozens more. The accident was caused by a combination of mechanical failure and human error that investigators said should have been preventable with better communication and warning systems. The most disturbing aspect of the mirror phenomenon is its selectivity. Not every driver experiences the visions, and those who do report them seem to be chosen based on unknown criteria. Some witnesses describe feeling compelled to take specific routes or make unplanned stops, as if they were being guided to locations where their advance warnings could be most effective. Jordan continued making the Sacramento-Los Angeles drive for work, but the mirror visions occurred sporadically and unpredictably. Sometimes months would pass without incident. Then suddenly the mirror would show multiple future accidents during a single trip. Jordan developed a system for quickly contacting authorities with specific details, becoming known to CHP dispatchers as a reliable source of accident predictions. In Jordan's final statement to investigators, written after 18 months of recurring visions, the psychological toll was evident. The worst part isn't seeing the accidents. It's knowing that every day, people are driving toward disasters they can't see coming. The mirror shows me that most accidents aren't really accidents at all. They're predictable outcomes of specific conditions and choices. But knowing what's going to happen doesn't make it easier to live with when you can't save everyone. The California Highway Patrol officially classifies the mirror reports as unexplained perceptual phenomena, possibly related to stress and extended highway driving. However, the department has implemented new protocols for handling specific accident predictions, and dispatcher training now includes procedures for pre-positioning emergency resources based on detailed caller information. The prophetic mirror phenomenon continues to appear to selected drivers on Interstate 5 through California's Central Valley. For those who experience these visions, it becomes both a gift and a curse. The ability to see future tragedies coupled with the crushing responsibility of trying to prevent them. The mirror serves as a reminder that the future isn't fixed, that some disasters can be avoided with timely warnings, but that knowledge of coming tragedy carries a psychological burden that few are prepared to bear. For drivers on California's busiest highway, the lesson is clear. Some reflections show more than what lies behind you. They reveal what lies ahead. And sometimes that knowledge comes with the power and responsibility to change the course of fate itself.